Thank you. So first, a mea culpa, but also to remind everybody, these folks, again, handpicked to fit the agenda for today. By now, you should have worked your way through most of them. We've got the afternoon break, and then we've got the reception afterwards. So please make the time to visit everybody. And the mea culpa is, as I was looking at my handwritten notes here, I had QMC kind of off on the right-hand side, and I forgot to mention them. So QMC is also among our equipment service providers, metering. And just want to make, so I've already made a call out to everybody else on this list. Metering is a common characteristic of all the high-performing hospitals we're looking at. So do take time to chat with QMC about what level of metering does it make sense in your hospital that you don't get drowned in data, but you do have the information you need to be able to discriminate about where the savings opportunities are. So we've always appreciated the support from QMC, and metering is a critical part of this. Can we go to the afternoon agenda, please? Here we go, great. So just to remind you, we looked at this morning, so we're about to begin with my good friend Amandeep to run through the Decarbonizing Existing Hospitals panel. So this is all of you who've got older facilities. This is not the new group, this is the older ones, and then I'll pick up the theme with the redevelopment pathway. How do we make sure every redevelopment project, whether it's a new hospital or it's a significant infrastructure renewal project in an existing hospital, every project is a step towards net zero. So that is the theme. You only get capital projects every now and again. You got to make, it's that third lens that our executive panel was talking about this morning: function, budget, and sustainability. So we'll play that through. And to remind everybody, the next break, who at the moment is sitting with colleagues from the same organization at the tables? There you go, you see, so you already know what they think. So when we break for the next time, can you find a nicer table with really... So the plan is for the Rolling Up Our Sleeves session, we would like to have at least 3 hospitals at every table. So you need to condense. You really want 6 people at a table if you could. We want at least 3 hospitals at each table. And then industry, government, utility companies, folks, mix your way up in there as well. And I think you'll find the structure of the questioning that Gillian's put together helpful and interesting. More importantly, we need to hear from you again, as I said this morning. We need to hear from you. What do you need to move forward on this agenda? And we will do everything we can to make it available for you in 2025. So at the break in the afternoon, please pick up your stuff and move to a table and make sure each table has 3 hospitals and other interested folks there. And to the extent there's 6 at each table, logistically it makes it better. It also means you'll find your conversations just a whole lot richer and more interesting. There's only 3 of you at a table. There's only so much you can say to each other. So that's the plan for the afternoon. Let me hand this over now to, again, my friend and colleague, Amandeep. Just by way of background, Amandeep is working with Janet at Headwaters on the project there. He was the author of the slides I showed you this morning on the Alberta Health Services success. Amandeep ran that project to take a whole bunch of hospitals in Alberta and get them to the good shape they're in. He's worked with many of you on your energy conservation demand management plans. He's working with Mike Rohan on the Long Island Jewish Medical Center in New York. I know of nobody who's as well qualified as Amandeep, and happy to have him pick this one up and give me a break and give you a break from hearing me. So, Amandeep.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks everyone for joining this afternoon. I hope you had a coffee because we're going to have a lot of questions for this panel. Let's start with sort of a, let's see if this thing working. Okay, we'll do introduction as we start of bring the panelists, but you already probably know all these panelists, and I'll do the introductions as well as start with the questions with them. But Before we do that, so your roadmap to net zero, and this is one of the slides, if you, you probably have seen this, but this is a pretty simple sort of what you call a framework for any facilities, whether that's healthcare or any other facilities, to look at it and say, where are you currently on that? Like, is there an opportunity to work through this framework? You look at energy efficiency as your starting sort of goal in any healthcare facilities, and how do you know you have accomplished that? Once you're at the top of the benchmarking chart that you've seen today, the graphs, you've accomplished the energy efficiency piece, then you move on to the heat recovery and the renewable, and then look at the sort of the carbon credits at the end. Sometimes the cycle doesn't work as straightforward. Sometimes you have to make decisions where you're looking at a heat recovery even prior to energy or efficiency, because your system's end of the life. You got to replace a chiller. Now, do you put a heat recovery chiller that would help you do that heat recovery? It's kind of a circle that you have to do, but eventually your roadmap is going to go through these 4 steps, and where you are on your journey. We have some of the case studies where we will look into those steps and how they have achieved and where they are, some of the hospitals on this kind of a journey to net zero. This journey will take you through this, like we've been sort of kind of preaching this 12 recommissioning measures, and we'll keep talking until these get implemented in every hospital. And if you look at this and you look at your facility, and if you haven't done these, I would sort of highly recommend this is probably your starting point. These are low-hanging fruits, and we have case studies today that have implemented, and we have seen the results coming out of that. So scheduling being top of the list, and we talked about collaborations here. If you're not getting the needle moved, collaboration is going to be the key, and we'll have discussions around how those collaboration help some of these healthcare facilities today to achieve these or implement these measures in these facilities. Let me start with Rob Simpson. Rob Simpson from Ontario Shores is here. As you could see, there's 2 graphs which I'll explain in a second. On the left-hand side is your benchmarking sort of profile for Ontario Shores back in 2018. They were in kind of the middle of the chart. There's 30% reduction in their overall energy use, and they climbed to the top of the benchmarking chart. And then there's trying to go to even the top of the benchmarking chart to get to their next ECDM cycle target. And you can see the gas consumption, how it has decreased over the years since then. Maybe, Rob, for the audience, we talked about collaboration as a theme. Can you help us sort of walk through this, and how did you guys collaborate on different levels with your facility operators, with your senior management? What were the key successes and challenges that you saw during this journey of achieving excellent results here?
So when I started at the facility in 2018, coming from commercial real estate was my background. We talked about how healthcare in Canada is a little bit behind the times, Europe and whatnot. Healthcare in general, I think, is way behind commercial real estate and the private sector. So having that background, coming in and seeing that we weren't as efficient as we could have been, very quickly, I started talking to the operators and saying, what are we doing here? Why are HVAC systems running 24/7? And a lot of the responses were, that's just how we've always kind of done it. And that's not good enough. So I said, let's get aggressive. I went to my boss and I engaged some of the other department heads and said, we're going to start cutting back on your HVAC systems. There's no one here after 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, whatever. And just got very, very aggressive with those schedules. From there, months later, didn't take very long. We started seeing, our quarterly savings reports coming down and showing some savings. And then we said, what's next? We started looking at, again, typical low-hanging fruit. We did the scheduling. A lot of different set points changes, optimizing outside fresh air for free cooling. All of those low-hanging fruit that we talked about for years, that was the opportunity at Ontario Shores. So the operators were on, I said, this is what we're going to do, guys, and they kind of took it and ran with it. So that's where the collaboration comes in. They weren't necessarily set in their ways when they say this is how we've always done it. That was their direction. So getting that change in direction and letting them run with it, not only produced the savings right up from day one almost, but continues to show. They keep coming up with ideas or just doing something and trying it and saying, I've been doing this for a couple of weeks. This is what I'm seeing. What do we think from there? The collaboration with the end users. We don't, being a mental health facility, we don't have ORs. We don't have, birthing units and things like that. So we have a lot of freedoms to do, what we've tried to do. Our IPAC team was involved. They wanted to know what we're doing, but they never stood in the way. And the end users, once they see the results and it's not affecting their spaces day to day, we really got no pushback at all.
Like, so one of the things I want to mention which touched me was how their journey went from shutting down a steam boiler in a facility. And Rob, if you can talk about that a bit, like how strategically you looked at the individual load in the building and say, okay, if I make this electric, can I shut down a steam boiler in 5 years? And that sort of the whole thinking process of, yes, and I won't be shutting down my steam boilers today, but 5 years from now, I can shut down my steam boilers. Can you talk about some of the decisions that happened in that process? And towards the end of it, we know that the steam boiler is no longer running in your facility. So.
Yeah, so one of the things that I identified very early was we had this massive steam plant that was grossly oversized. It used to do laundry, it used to do sterilization and humidification. That was all outsourced or done in a different way. So really the two biggest loads on our steam plant was in our food prep area, we had a big dishwasher that was running on steam that was due to be replaced. So I said, let's get this on electric power instead. So another load off the steam plant, and you guys helped me with that. And then we got just the domestic water. So in I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but late 2020 came around and we were starting to commission our cogeneration plant, which was installed earlier that year. So we really wanted to make sure we could reclaim as much heat from that process as we could and start dumping it into our domestic water so we could get off that steam. Again, Amandeep and the folks at Enerlife helped out doing the load analysis. We had lots of heat from the cogen and our heating plant. So it was really us sitting together and talking about what we're going to do. And instead of engaging an engineer up front saying redesign our systems, it was kind of me and the operations guys and you folks just sitting around saying, well, this is what we think the piping layout should look like, and put a three-way valve here and a balancing valve here, another heat exchanger perhaps. And we took our idea to an engineer and said, what do you guys think? And they looked and said, that sounds about right, signed off on it, and off we went. So again, it's just engaging the frontline staff and getting their input. They're working day to day with the equipment. I got some operators there that have been there 20 years. So they know the equipment, they know the capabilities of it. So just engaging them from day one is really, the results are there. And they're engaged and they want to keep looking and they're maintaining they're owning what we put together. So getting the dishwasher off steam, getting domestic water off steam, a little bit of piping configuration, which was operating funds. We didn't have to go to capital for this, and we got this shut down just last winter. So that is now, it's not quite decommissioned yet, just in case we want to get through a heating season just to make sure. But come spring, if everything goes well, we can kind of actually decommission that, rip them out, reclaim the space for something different, and and the efficiencies kind of speak for themselves.
That's where we're going to put heat recovery chiller.
Heat recovery chiller, yeah, that's next thing. Yeah.
That's your next target. So I'm going to take this opportunity now. You heard from Mike this morning around Northville Health, and Mike, maybe you can probably we touched on some of the carrots and sticks this morning. Maybe give a context to the audience around your challenges and what you're trying to accomplish as a corporate level, because how you're currently structured. Like, what are some of those challenges, and that may be related to some of the organizations here where they have multiple facilities and they have to manage those pieces.
Sure. So we spoke to some of the regulatory issues this morning, but how we manage from the tactical level, as depicted on our pyramid, that was borrowed from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the idea is we have our base level of energy efficiency, conservation, education, all the things that we learned in kindergarten. And then we start moving up that to a little more sophisticated elements. So right now we're in the midst of a number of projects, 7 megawatts of solar generation at 2 of our hospitals, a 1,300-ton geothermal project at another. working with the state on a potential hydrogen project. So there's a lot of what I was calling a balanced hybrid approach, and it was suggested this morning that we might call it a mosaic. So we have lots of different opportunities, and it's case specific. Every hospital has its own challenges. We have hospitals in Manhattan, very dense population, and that one hospital in Manhattan started out in 1874. So that building on that one block goes from 1874 to the newest building, which was probably in the 1970s. 2 blocks away, we are developing a all-electric building that will decant some of that space. So that, again, iterative, but that's been in the works for 10 years. It's a big challenge to construct in Manhattan. But we also have where that 1,300-ton geothermal plant is, a 27-acre campus out on the end of Long Island. So based on the specific conditions that we have, we're developing our projects.
I have a specific question, Mike. Like, you're in a unique position where you're at a sort of a corporate level where you're working with a lot of facilities who you kind of help with them sort of develop those business cases. Like, how do you act as a sort of a channel that conveys that message down to the facilities and then take the message from the facilities, bring it up to the sort of the executive levels and make this decision? Like, what does that look like from decarbonization perspective on your day-to-day basis?
So I guess that also goes back to our history. About 7 years ago, we hired 2 folks that used to work for the utility in the rebate program. So we started to, with that bottom level of the pyramid, start to develop a lot of the base projects, the lighting, the steam systems. And we started to bring in a lot of money from the rebates. That facilitated then the next level, which was that sustaining fund, using that amount of money to fund the next level of projects. And we made the argument that, well, we're also saving energy, saving dollars, and we started to aggregate that component. So the sustaining fund started to consist of the rebates and incentives, as well as the energy savings for the previous year. So that allowed us to move to the next level. Concurrently, on the clinical side, we started to develop, we have business employee resource groups, BERGs. So we started a Greenberg. And the Greenberg started to bring in, we have about 500 people in the Greenberg, and folks that have a general interest in sustainability and doing the right thing for the right reason. Concurrent with that, we identified a chief sustainability officer. Now, I heard a parallel that about 20, 25 years ago, when quality became more of a department, that systems might have taken a clinical manager and made them the chief quality officer also. So right now, and now that officer has become a discrete department. We do have a chief sustainability officer, but she's also our chief expense officer. So this does bring in purchasing, but she has a lot more on her plate than just sustainability. So I think we're at that next level, that next inflection point where we recognize that the chief sustainability officer ought to be a dedicated position. We do have clinical folks that have come over also. One of our docs, who was an emergency manager, is now a full-time sustainability clinician. So it's been an iterative process.
Thanks, Mike. I think it's getting clearer and clearer, like the success stories and the synergies that are coming out is all around collaboration. How do you collaborate with different parties of interest and bring them to the table so you get a better outcome in most of these cases? Let me take you to the next one is our Pierre from Island Health. Pierre, can you also have a unique challenges around decarbonization and a big portfolio to sort of and mandate to achieve. So you're 50% of your emissions coming from 3 facilities. So it's kind of easy to target, but still a lot of work to be done. How you guys are managing this transition of decarbonization within your sort of mandates and goals that you're trying to achieve in your organization?
Well, as you said, 50% come from 3 facilities, 60% come from the top 5, I think. So strategically, it's pretty easy to figure out where to target most of our efforts. But I have a question for the audience. How many folks in healthcare have a building automation system specialist or something like that in their staff? Okay, 1 hand, 2 hands, okay, 3 hands, 4 hands. That's been the biggest impact that we've had. Years ago, we had a consultant who we brought in regularly to optimize our buildings. And he had this idea that in order to be more effective, to be more impactful, we needed to internalize that. So he convinced our utility partners, BC Hydro and Fortis BC, to pilot a program where they would pay for him to be on our staff. That has been an incredible pilot, to the point where now we have 4 building automation system specialists on our team. Other health authorities are incredibly jealous, and BC Hydro is making funding available to hire 50 building automation system specialists across healthcare and other public sectors. I mention this because this has been the biggest impact, the biggest tangible impact that I can think of that we've been working on. NRCan has done a meta study, and they think that by optimizing your existing buildings, you can save about 20%. We actually are more like 30%. So to meet our 2030 and 2050 goals, almost a third of that can just be in the low-hanging fruit that's been mentioned today, and just making buildings run better. A lot of our measures are no cost or low cost, and they're having incredible impact. We've heard today about just like less air changes in rooms that are not used, and just optimizing the existing buildings. We're all surprised at the impact that that's actually having. And then the fact that you have these people on staff is incredible, because as you optimize a building, you don't just walk away. You have to keep checking on that building to make sure those measures are working. And then as you build your portfolio, you need more people just to watch more buildings. And so that's what we're finding. The other thing we've invested in is in data. We're focused on a software called Sky Spark, but there's others. There's Copper Tree, there's all kinds of building automation type of tools. But now that we have all of this incredible real-time data, we're able to check on the performance of our conservation measures. And we're also able to monitor facilities from a phone and be able to work with the operators to fix that air handling unit or whatever's going wrong. We have real-time data, we have real-time trending. The other part of that is my team has created an interface for me so that I can check and see where things are at any time, because there's a big communications component as well. My executive director, my VP is always asking me, like, where are we at with GHGs or whatever? And I can just go to this interface and say, we're here today. So the big things has been internalizing that capacity. I can't say enough how impactful that's been. And just having good data has been a real game changer for us. So I hope I answered the question.
No, you did. Thanks, Peter. And then maybe a takeaway. We talked about takeaway. This is probably a takeaway for Enbridge and ISO when you're developing your programs. Maybe look into the program that they're, I mean, having a BAS tech being supported by incentives. I think that's a good program for a lot of the facilities who currently lack that resource, and having even part of that could be an exercise under training, which we understand BAS plays a critical role in every facility which is getting optimized. Matt, you guys have 2 unique projects that are currently, or one is complete and another one is in process. Can you talk to us how you guys tackling a decarbonization in your facility and the approaches that you took for these 2 sites?
Certainly, thank you. I'll start with the Ajax Pickering site because that's the project that's complete, and we received our 5% award earlier this year. It was overall 18.1% reduction in overall thermal energy savings. But this started with an operational issue in a brand new chiller plant that was installed using HEAP funding, for those who remember HEAP funding, and it wasn't commissioned well enough to be nimble with the building requirements. And so a new facility manager came on board, joined the organization, went to that site, and started to quickly recognize that there were gaps in the chilled water system from a hydronic balancing perspective, from a building operations perspective. A lot of "I'm too cold, I'm too hot" calls to the engineering office, which ultimately frustrated the individual, and he then worked with consultant, building automation consultant, and then ultimately a mechanical contractor to balance the system, ultimately leading to less hot and cold calls, but also allowed us to start to dig into other initiatives within the building on the thermal side once we had the chilled water side balanced, and we went right after the natural gas boilers, starting with optimization of the oxygen levels, excess O2, other emissions, and really dialing in the operation of our boiler plant, sequencing of the boiler plant. We have boilers at this particular facility all throughout, and so sometimes a boiler might not need to be turned on, and through sequencing of operations and identifying opportunities using the building automation system, we're actually able to optimize boiler and chiller plant optimization and utilization, which resulted in significant savings on the thermal side, and that took place between late 2021 and partially through 2022 into the 2022 heating season, and we recognized these savings last year. What we are affectionately referring to as Project LEAD, which is Lake Ridge Health, Electrification, and Decarbonization, is the decarbonization initiative happening at the Lake Ridge Health Oshawa site. This started with an identification that a 1.1 million square foot building had emissions well over 13,000 tons, and with the carbon tax looming, we were starting to sweat what it was going to look like in 2030, paying for carbon emissions. And working with business partners on sort of a straw dog opportunity, we submitted an application for low carbon economy fund, just what was possible with our site. We have two CHPs, two cogens, 750 kilowatts apiece, so 1.5 meg. We have three 800 horsepower steam boilers. They're massive. I love them to death, but they burn a lot of gas. And ultimately, we ended up submitting an application for low carbon economy funding, which was a successful application, and we were awarded $1.056 million to reduce the carbon emissions of the Oshawa site. That project was actually competitively tendered, open market. I have a target of 3,530 tons. I have a timeline of March 31st, 2025. Tell me how you're going to get me there. And we had three successful applicants, a lot of very interested parties, but the guarantee of 3,530 tons, not necessarily something that was of the appetite of the market, but the timeline of March 31st, 2025, very difficult to achieve in such a short period of time. The RFP was out last August. And so we had three proponents respond, ultimately culminating in our partnership with Ecosystem. They developed a plan and a strategy and a project that resulted in an electric steam boiler, which is going to supplement our steam boiler, natural gas steam boilers in the shoulder seasons, and also components of LED lighting and heat recovery in an exhaust air plenum. But the crown jewel of the project, the keystone of the project, is a heat recovery chiller. And that heat recovery chiller, coupled with the other initiatives, are going to get us our 3,530 tons, and we're actually exceeding that now through some design refinements within the project. But in addition to that, we are using our cogens as a peak shaving plant. And I realize that's not necessarily a luxury that everybody has, but I now have the opportunity to go from a Class B facility to a Class A facility. It's going to save me a boatload of money on electricity. I have a peak shaving plant so that when those peaks occur in the province, I can avoid them. I can generate my own electricity. Yes, there will be emissions as a result of that, but the overall savings of that initiative are significant. And so at just over 5,000 tons, that project this year, if that project was off the ground, it would have saved me the equivalent of like $400,000 in carbon tax. Really wish I had it implemented at this stage. But yeah, and that's the project lead. And forever thankful for this opportunity and the initiative from our business partners with the ecosystem, opportunity identification, and working with us on addressing our needs as an organization and really pointing to opportunities that say we can go a little bit deeper here, we can do a little bit better here. There's some deferred maintenance initiatives in there as well, which are minor in the grand scheme of things, but when the hallways are lit nicely with LED lights where they were previously T8s or whatever they are, and my terrazzo floor looks incredible in my wing that's from the 50s, people are going to be a lot happier to be at work.
Thanks, Matt. And if you're looking for a reason to be there in 2025, we'll bring Matt in here and ecosystem. So we'll do a case study on that. So I look forward to it. Again, I just want to remind the audience, I think Slido is still working, Jillian, if I'm not wrong. Okay, cool. If you still have questions through Slido, or you can always, like, if you have any questions, you can jump in. Mike is around with the mic. I got to say that. This is kind of a unique perspective you guys bring with different challenges. I just want to quickly go back to Rob on a sort of your transition. You're the one that currently have sort of done one of these things, and the results that are currently showing, and a substantial savings that have been achieved. We talked about your next step to do that, but I just want to quickly go back. And there are many facilities right now in here. We're looking at how do they strategically make those decisions around what to do with the steam dishwasher, what to do with the steam kettles that they currently have in their facility. From your experience within your organization, how tough was that to make those decisions? Like, what was the pushback, if you had any, around those decisions because those are fundamental things to sort of get to the next step around. I mean, optimization is a key piece. You guys done a lot of that through scheduling, but those strategic decisions around looking at 5 years down the road that we would not have a use of a steam chiller, like how did that come along with your organization?
Yeah, again, to the question about pushback, there really wasn't any pushback. I identified very quickly that steam plant was already grossly oversized, and if we could get some equipment off of that, step by step, we're moving towards a plan of getting it out of the facility completely, which was very attractive. We talked about gas, carbon taxes was coming up to Matt's point, and that's only getting more and more expensive. But also the business cases of shutting things down. It's not only utilities. We're going to save a ton of gas. We're going to save a bunch of water. We're going to save a bunch of chemical with our water treatment folks and maintenance. I have a maintenance contract for all my boilers. We were able to pull those out and save another, few $1,000s a year. You get all of that stuff into a business case, and it makes sense for the money people. So I made sure to set, the end user, the manager of the kitchen, put her mind at ease that this is going to work, right? Your equipment's going to work. And she didn't really care. She said, we trust you guys. And then, convincing again the money folks and the capital folks that this is what we need to do. Let's get strategic, and let's just not make the same mistakes again about replacing a piece of equipment. Be proactive and start building a case for 5, 10, 15 years down the road.
Thanks, Rob. Jillian, just want to check if there are any questions. Anybody, audience, feel free to jump in if you have any questions. Go ahead, Mike.
Question to Pierre, but also to maybe the rest of the panel. Let's get sitting here. Regards to your building automation, right? Office. Utility part, yeah. Did you guys get energy managers as well, or it's just
your BS specialists were your energy managers?
No.
Brett. We're really fortunate that BC Hydro and Fortis BC provide salary agreements for, I think, 6 of my 8 energy people. They fund up to 80% of their salaries. So our utility partners are fantastic. We have 2 energy managers and then a couple of other energy related roles. And then, as I said, 4 building automation system specialists. We've put a lot into that program because we're seeing the immediate results of that. So we have a pretty broad and really fantastic energy team.
And then our utility guys, are they here? You kind of see what I'm going to right now, right?
It pays dividends. I can't, sing the praises of our utility partners in the program enough.
Perfect. And then another question towards that. You brought up, we call it building intelligence systems, but Copper Tree and Sky. What's when you're using
SkySpark.
SkySpark. Thank you from that standpoint. Your BAS team then utilizes and oversees that data then, and manages that data. Or
Yeah, So 3 members of my team are deploying SkySpark across existing buildings and our new facilities as well. That's just the one that we've chosen. But we did a big process of looking at all the other ones. There's another one called Kaizen. The advantage of SkySpark is just that we can program it and customize it to our needs. But as I said, there's others. People are more, interested in other ones, but SkySpark is the one that we really like. And we just loaded all of our water data as well. So we not only track energy data and also performance of every single building, but we also track water now. So it's been great for us.
I appreciate that. Hopefully our utility providers see the benefits of all this.
Happy to help.
Takeaways. There's one more question.
My question is
So my question is, to organization does not have control specialties in place, how you keep commissioning and richer commissioning result persist? Because let's say you do commissioning this year and in year 5 they're all gone. So without those experts, how you maintain all the good results in place?
I'm happy to jump in here. Hold your controls contractor accountable. I have a great working relationship with my building automation specialist, the company. We do have 2 techs allocated to our 5 hospital sites. When we make changes in our BAS system, basically we ensure that those set points are holding true, that the savings that we were expected to realize from that initiative, if we're able to through submetering on major mechanical systems, that we're able to verify that we're still performing at the performance levels that we expected. But ultimately it comes down to accountability. And I'm very excited for a new submetering system that we'll be having implemented and commissioned in very short order across Lake Rochelle, 5 sites, which will give me a far greater visibility and granularity on the performance of the buildings. And then we can tie that back to the controls contractor and say, hey, this building was performing here, it's now performing here. We've sort of identified that it's the, exhaust fan for our largest units, or we want to change this set point and see what the impact is on the building. I think ultimately, if you're focused on it and it's a concern of yours, hold the entities and resources you have available to you accountable for it. Whether it's an internal resource or in some cases, such as mine, it's a third party. But it's fostering that relationship. It's establishing clear expectations as to how things ought to be performing, and working with them and getting their feedback on how it actually is performing. Staying on top of commissioning, retro commissioning, if you will, is critical. My Ajax site we're not done. We've achieved 18% thermal energy savings. If I let that slip, that's all going to go away, and Ian's going to come and take my plaque. So I think accountability is sort of where it resides.
I have one question, and we'll go back to the audience. Mike, maybe starting with you. There are decisions currently being made in every organization around replacing a boiler that are probably counterintuitive to a decarbonization plan. What you as an organization is currently doing so that doesn't put you 5 years or 10 years behind on those decisions, because things could have been done differently?
Yeah, the boiler is a big challenge. About 2/3 of the BTUs going into all of our hospitals are in the form of natural gas. But every time we're adding a new chiller, they are primarily heat recovery chillers or heat pumps. So that transition, which then starts to take load off the boilers. But the boiler challenge is going to be with us. One of the other things, though, that we've been touching on is the data element. We're also starting to put in metering monitoring at the utility edge of the buildings, as well as inside the hospitals to monitor utilization voltage. One, it holds the utilities to a level of voltage that they're supposed to be providing. They have what they call a voltage conservation optimization program, and sometimes that just means we're getting close to a brownout. Generators have been kicking on as a result of that. So with that starts to allow us to get into grid interactive buildings. And I've heard about, I didn't know about Class A and Class B, but I think it's something that we do need, because that then facilitates that peak shaving opportunity.
Thanks, Mike. Jillian, is there any questions on? Okay, cool. Any questions from the audience? Can we open right now? Okay, we'll still use 3 more minutes, and I don't want to leave anything to Ian, extra minutes. Pierre, same question to you, how you guys are making sure that decisions that are currently made are run through the lens of low carbon, net zero, that don't end up sort of biting you in 2 years, then you're sort of looking at replacing some of that equipment because there's pre-piling. How do you guys avoiding that in your facilities?
That's a great question. If you happen to be at Hart House on the 7th, I'm presenting on exactly that topic. I'll be presenting on our low carbon resilience roadmap, which is something we just completed with funding from our utility partners, a lot of funding. So in BC, we have our 2030 and 2050 government mandated targets. We pay carbon offsets every year that we don't meet those targets. So there's huge incentive for us to, reach our 2030 and 2050 targets. So we know what those are, and we know what we're doing now, but in between is really fuzzy. So we decided that we needed to create this low carbon resiliency roadmap, and it looks different at different facilities. At some of the bigger facilities, it's really an experts driven process where we have workshops with everybody involved, and we figure out a phased approach to 2030 to decarbonize. In other facilities like our long-term care, we've used some really cutting-edge technologies, a company called Audette, another company called IES, and creating digital twins and decarb roadmaps, because we wanted to see what, one size doesn't fit all. So we wanted to see what tools are out there and how we could do that. Because exactly as you said, Almandeep, we don't want to make big infrastructure decisions that screw us in a few years, basically, for lack of a better term. So the roadmap really spells out in different ways the steps and the pathways that we need to take to meet those goals. And it's really to avoid getting stuck on big capital expenditures that are going to be big carbon bombs down the road or something like that. So the roadmap is really, as it says, it's the pathway for us to get to those 2030 and 2050 targets.
Thanks, Pierre. Just to summarize before we pass this on to Ian, so what I heard for the key things, just going back, sort of developing a roadmap. So if you looked at sort of those 4 steps and you look at your facility, and then if you currently don't have a roadmap around major capital asset replacement that's going to happen in the next 5-10 years, that'll be the path you want to take it, just to understand what is your low carbon replacement for that equipment. Are you doing like for like? If so, why so? And if you're not doing, then what are your alternative solutions to that? And looking at that as a roadmap help you map out the next 5-10 years of your facility. Collaboration is the key, as we heard. Like, there's collaboration within your organization, there's collaboration outside your organization that's going to help you achieve those goals. We saw examples of the Matt's facilities. We saw examples from Rob's where collaboration internally happened, whereas on Matt's the collaboration externally happened. And Mike has a unique challenge with his facilities, not only on just managing the facility side, but managing the grid side as well, because there's a lot happening on that side as well. Thank you very much. This is very informative session, at least for me, just to kind of get that information out, and then hopefully audience did take some notes and takeaways, and utilities have a lot of takeaways from this session, so hopefully that gets plugged into the next ECDM cycle and we see a lot of action-oriented results coming in. Thank you, everyone.
May I call up a redevelopment panel? There we go. You know who you are. Just as a reminder before the, which I'll pass on again before the break, is today is all about actionable takeaways. So honestly, if you don't have at least 1 or 2 big takeaways at this point in time, you're not paying attention. There's just been so much generosity and food for thought coming out from the panelists, and we'll need that for the town hall session towards the end of the day, which is, if those are the things that you think you can do, what do you need to be able to put them into place, and how can you help each other, and how can greening healthcare help you? But the redevelopment pathway, I love the terminology there. It's every capital project has to be a step towards net zero, because the capital projects you're doing today will still be with us in 2050. And you just cannot miss an opportunity. I think Amandeep and the Decarbonizing Existing Hospitals panel picked up on that well. I am, I'll come to the panelists in just a moment. I love the mix of this group. I scored a home run here. We kind of picked the folks we wanted and blessed them. They were all available. So we got the builders, the designers, the hospitals, and so on. But let me remind you of this one first. This should be shocking to any and every one of you that either has a hospital under development, or designs hospital, or builds hospitals. What this shouts, and again, I'm explaining, every horizontal line here is a hospital that's opened, most since 2015 and a few since 2010. You can't quite see the jurisdictions on the left-hand side there, but there's a bunch of Ontario hospitals that are at the top there. Best in class. We have world-class hospitals coming, and we haven't found anything better anywhere. I'm not sure if our friends from the National Health Service are on the live stream. They may well be, but we have a meeting with them bright and early tomorrow morning on the data coming from their hospitals, saying, because everything that we know, we learn from the data. The data kind of says things. What about this? And what about that? And you dig into it, and the truth comes out. Whereas the data leads you to where best practices are, where good standards are, and so on. But this slide, if that is the National Energy Code at the top, there says the vast majority of our new hospitals are failing. where in the process they failed is really important, and that's what we're working with everybody to try to understand. That's what our summer workshop was at Cortellucci Vaughan was all about. And if they were all failing, it would almost be easier saying the National Energy Code got it wrong. You know, the archetype doesn't make sense. But the fact we got some winners and a whole bunch of losers says this is a really fertile land to work our way into. But new hospital performance is a big deal. Again, if we can't get the new hospitals right, what hope do we have for the thousands of existing ones? Greening Healthcare has done a lot of work on this. All of these documents are on our open website. They're available to everybody here, whether you're a Greening Healthcare member or not. We got the case study of Humber River on the right-hand side, and Grace Pan is here. If you haven't spoken to Grace about the story of Humber River, it's a great one. Cortellucci Vaughan says it wasn't just an oddity that Humber River got it right. We can replicate that model. That's so encouraging for us. And in the middle is all about standards. So Amandeep's team took the time to go and study the actual top performing hospitals and say, if their numbers are that good, how much of that is lighting, how much is heating, how much is cooling, how much is fans, how much is medical equipment? If you break it all down, then you're going to find best practice in each of the system areas, then you can repack those back again. And new hospitals should all do better than Cortellucci Vaughan and Humber River because we have better data to model by. And these are now, these are published. If you have a hospital under development, and a substantial number of you do, your design team has to be using these data to calibrate their energy models, because otherwise it's just their guesses, their assumptions, it's rules of thumb, it's old news. Use the best of the best to model your new hospital. And by the time it's built, it's going to be better than any of the ones we've seen so far. And that's how we keep piggybacking our way or leapfrogging our way to getting better and better over time. But our acute care hospital, 30 equivalent kilowatt hours per square foot per year in the Toronto climate should be the standard. That should be the number. You should have to explain why you're not there. With continuing care hospitals, similar thing, but they're closer to 20. And this is what the best of what we've already done looks like. And this is what, again, if I take you back to here, you can see 20 and 30 there. You know, we're not even close. Like National Energy Code is close. And so we've proven that the National Energy Code is doable. The others are falling behind, and the real interest is where that is, where in the process the failure is. So this was a chart that we put together for the summer workshop at Cortellucci Vaughan, which is, we like process flows, because if you look at the process flows and what should happen in each step, then that kind of gets you to where did it go wrong. So I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but there's a whole planning and design element there where if you get it right, you win. But if you don't set the stage correctly at the start of a new hospital, you can't catch up. If you don't get the energy model right, if you don't get the energy target, there's a whole procurement stage about getting the right dynamics, the right kind of project agreement in place. We've got the whole construction and commissioning area, and then we got the handover. And if I could share an observation, we believe that commissioning is perhaps the biggest of the weak links in steps there. That the original concept, it just didn't get there because the commissioning process is wholly inadequate. And the way we started the day to say, if nothing that we're doing at the moment is coming close to working as it needs to be, we're talking about fundamental change. Now, we're not going to change the way we pour concrete, but we are going to change the way we model buildings, and we are going to change the way that we commission buildings. And I'll leave that message to you. If you haven't paid serious attention to those two steps, you're likely to end up in the wrong part of the chart that we looked at previously. I'm going to come back to this later because I want to use it as we work our way through, but here's my star panel. We've got David from Mackenzie Health, who was a generous host at the summer workshop at Cortellucci Vaughan, and I'm going to start with you in a moment, David, about summarizing what we learned at the summer workshop about what did we get right. That's kind of the key piece. But so David, Cortellucci Vaughan is a big hospital by world standards. It's an excess of million. And James really wanted to have you here to talk about a smaller hospital, so Quinte Health. So we've got Prince Edward County Hospital coming together right now, and is planning for geothermal. How did that, Amandeep touched on this really well. How do you make the big decisions? How do you get them through? How do you provide the evidence? So some really neat things happening in Prince Edward County. So at much smaller end, we've got Peter speaking to the design team. So Peter directly involved with James at Quinte Health. We got Mark Henderson, the builder. So again, as we're playing with this, as you saw, PCL and Ellis Don are both industry members of Greening Healthcare. We have great expectations, no pressure, but great expectations of how the general contractors can take on the bigger role of the integrator and the visionary of the performance, and take great pride in everything we build is at the top of that chart. We don't take no for an answer. And Rudy, having heard your excellent presentation in Halifax around capital projects in general, for every new hospital we build, we have 100 infrastructure renewal projects, like projects that are big capital projects replacing old plant. How do we make sure we don't go like for like, but it's a step towards net zero? So Rudy, really interested in the thoughts you shared with us in Halifax on how do you get those capital projects right when there's never enough budget, never enough time, and it better be ready by October the 15th because something bad will happen otherwise. So great panel. We're going to work our way through the big issues around every capital project needs attention, and the likelihood is you're going to do something differently than you would have done in the past. So I warned you already, David, but very simply with Cortellucci Vaughan Hospital, what made the difference? Did the Humber River experience find its way into the conversation? I can't remember how many, Grace, you must be feeling under the gun by now, because everybody talks about, I'm going to beat Humber. Beating Humber is a great idea because it's in everybody's interest, right? But from everything we talked about in the summer, David, what made the difference at Cortellucci Vaughan?
Thanks, Ian. It's a great question, and one that it's a good one to pursue. In fact, Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great, made his fortune off of studying companies in the same industry that produce different outcomes, and teams of researchers trying to figure out what made the difference. So without a team of researchers, I tried my best here, and I talked to a lot of people on the project team over the past week, some who had been there since the beginning, some who joined midstream, and some afterwards. And I wrote this sentence on the subway this morning. Hopefully I got it right here. But I think what was special about our project was that it was a set of conditions that allowed really good people to work at their best to create great outcomes. And I would say that the great outcomes included sustainability and energy efficiency, but included so many other things as well. So quality and safety, experience and staff satisfaction, staff physician satisfaction, all those things have had remarkable success as a result of the efforts and the approaches that were used. So just at this time last week at Cortellucci Vaughan Hospital, we were hosting a large patient safety symposium on our efforts and successful outcomes in safety and quality. Over the same time period, our staff satisfaction over the duration of the project, the 10 years, it went up 45%. So there was something that was going on in the water that led to a number of successful outcomes. When you drill down a little bit more on this project specifically, I really continue to think that it was anchored in a really strong set of planning principles. And we've heard a lot about design principles here, but these sat above design principles, and these were planning principles that were endorsed, developed, and then accepted and approved across the organization and at the highest levels. But they really were the anchoring set of strategic statements or strategic choices that were made. One of those was energy sustainability, but it was up there with quality, safety, experience, flexibility, all kinds of really, really important things. And the key was to be able to deliver on all of those, not just for a few to crowd out the others. Yeah. So I think one of the hallmarks of our project that might be different than some other successful projects was a strong decentralized decision-making structure. So our view was that there were cascading choices that were made along all those dimensions, and we were empowering the project team and the relevant expertise in those areas to be making the best choices in those areas, supported by a strong, a strong overall governance, but allowing people to sort of operate at their best scope of practice. And scope of practice doesn't just apply to, the nursing and the physician world. So we viewed all of those principles as complementary, not competitive. The project team, and this has come up a few times today, it was really interesting to hear. Very diverse and interdisciplinary project team. So it wasn't the sort of old school redevelopment team. It was renamed as a planning and design team. It had expertise, clinical expertise. It had our IT expertise, engineering, project management, and then I'm leading at the VP level with none of those technical expertises. So it really was a good blend, and people are still commenting today how they learned from each other and pushed each other to really uphold their elements of the project that they were the expert on. Our external advisors or PDC team, planning and design compliance team, very strong, not their first rodeo. So they brought a lot of good experience, and some developed, especially in the IT and the energy area, a real passion for this. This became a huge passion that brought out a lot of energy in that. And then our external partners. So, PCL was at the table, JCI, Stantec, all of that group, a lot of deep strength in those. And I think that we had a very strong collaborative relationship. In fact, I was saying at our table that I think the relationship actually, it strengthened over time rather than in some cases it kind of deteriorated. It strengthened over time. And we, as an organization, we had a long history in big contracted out services. So this became one of our biggest 6 contracted out services during the operational phase. We come together as a community practice amongst long-term contracts to understand different approaches to support each other. In fact, we've gone down the road of exploring the vested methodology out of University of Tennessee, which really brings about a strong win-win relationship and supporting each other. So supporting the business model of who we're contracting with and them and our goals being supported. So I think all those things together were our, a little bit of our recipe that worked for us. It's not the only recipe that's out there, but it was, I think, something that was strong throughout the course of the project that helped to deliver good outcomes.
That's really helpful. And let me go to the other end of that transaction, that relationship, Mark, with PCL. So you've heard the hospital's perspective on how this went well from the contractor's standpoint. What of all of that worked well for you? What could have been better? We put you at each end of the table, so this is super safe. You're fine.
Yeah, I didn't take notes on this part of the agenda, but I think what really went well was the vision. As David mentioned, it was rooted in very good leadership, very good direction. So there was really no sense of panic when things were starting to go a little bit sideways. You always went back to those core values of he talked about the elements of success and made sure that we were making decisions that helped the project achieve success. But we're part of the equation, and our FM partners are at the table and helping to make decisions because they have to operate the building. They've got the 30-year concession period where the decisions we make early on as a team really impact how energy and the hospital is going to operate. So, clear values, clear vision from leadership throughout the whole team, I think is really what the recipe for success looks like on that job.
You mentioned when things go sideways. I don't know if anybody else heard that. Give us an example of something that went sideways.
I can't speak to real examples on that project, but other times where they do go sideways, it's again going back and checking yourself, maybe checking an ego from time to time, asking the right questions, and are you doing this for the benefit of your company, or are you doing it for the benefit of the entire group? And if you can't answer it in the essence of the entire group, you're probably not doing it the right way. So
it's a good answer, David. What went sideways during the project?
Well, I think with many of these, the early days are a little bit, a little bit of a period where you're trying to figure things out. So I think the early days were somewhat of a shock to the system. Maybe more so for us because this was our first DBFM project. But I think we resolved a lot of issues. We had 2 disputes the entire project, and we've had 0 in the operational phase. So for 99.99% of the issues, we resolved them. I do remember the first question out of the gate at the bidders meeting. It came from the winning consortium's lead at the time, and he sort of says, "Well, how many of the PSOS requirements need to be met?" And of course, IO steps up and they give their stock answer. Well, 100% of them. You know that.
That's right.
And so you know that there's a little bit of jostling and jockeying that goes on at the start. But I had no idea how we were ever going to resolve some of these things. But eventually we did. And most of the time, it was related to communication, I would say. There were some that were just business issues, but a lot of the time it was communication. So improving the communication and forming, I think maturing the relationship helped us to resolve some issues.
Yeah, I love your comment that unusually the relationship actually got stronger over time. And that takes a lot of effort on both sides, right? James, at the smaller scale of Prince Edward County, how much of what you're hearing resonates with you? What in addition might you talk on? Then Peter, I'll come back to you from a consultant standpoint. So
Quinte Health is a 4-hospital system just out of Toronto, and Picton is a smaller community in the Prince Edward County. And I picked up this project about 3 years ago when it was just in the approval stage of going into the detailed tender design. So there'd been a history of this project, and I think the history here is really important in terms of understanding this. The community that was in Prince Edward County was very concerned about losing the hospital, and there was probably writing on the wall because services were depreciating. They'd removed the obstetrics, they'd reduced the surgical because the volumes just weren't there. And so the community felt threatened in that whole regard. And so that's kind of been building in that process for about 10 years prior to this. But as they continued to advocate for the community and for the hospital and for the services to be maintained, there was kind of a reinvigorating of the design process. And so they started bringing it back in. And so they had the functional program. They decided what was going to be there for services and got through the process of bringing the design. But they'd started the process too of the sustainability being a very prime piece of the community's interest and the leadership at the hospital. And so that was very prominent and very obvious right from the start. And so there was a lot of actually investigation of the various things, like how much can we do, what can we do? So they went across the spectrum on all different fronts of energy and materials, and really landed on mass timber being a focus. One for carbon, but also it's part of their vernacular. They're a community of farmers, and the wood and the wood frame actually speaks very much to their ethos and to their history. And so it really fit in well. And they had a joke about, we didn't want it to look like the beer store down the street, right? They didn't want a cookie cutter kind of a metallic building that just didn't really speak to their community. And so that was very much part of the process in going forward. And so there were elements of sustainability as well. So solar was a big part of it. So we did end up putting in about 30% of our solar energy is provided by solar, but also geothermal was on the books. And at first it was looked at. Then the case for it was like 100-year payback, which then it just was not looked at, but it was done very cursory, I would say. So when I started, it was actually in the garbage, and we kind of said, well, we have a few weeks here before we can kind of look at this. So can we do a feasibility study that actually looks at this realistically? And in doing so, it actually pointed to a very positive result, much better than what was originally thought. And then we dug a drill hole and did actual testing of it to even confirm it. It gave us even better results. So through the actual kind of more investigation and really looking into it, it was shown that it was very feasible. And so we built it in, and it did get the Ministry of Health to actually agree then to also fund it, which it came in at a higher price than the base plant. And we actually did a business case, said, if I build the regular plant, it'll cost me X. If I build it with geothermal, it'll be Y. And the payback period then for the offset on utilities is about 20 years. So it wasn't like a slam dunk, but it was enough that the ministry said, this is actually a good thing. And so they were supportive of it. Mm-hmm. And so it really fit in well with our kind of targets. It fit in well with the ministry. They agreed with it. And so it was put in as part of the project. And so we are now in construction. So we'll see proof is in the pudding. We have to execute. We were a build finance model. Midway, it was changed to CCDC2. There was challenges about understanding. We wanted to make sure we had the market conditions for allowing kind of the medium-sized contractors to bid and not price them out should they have not the financing. And so that decision was made by the ministry and IO, and we went along with it. And it did actually, I think, provide for us really a good partner in it. We're working with M. Sullivan and Sons, and they are now on the ground with us, and we are working through it. I guess it's a prescriptive design, right? Because it's CCDC2, so we're committed to the ones finding the results for it, right? They're not on the hook for it. But really the quality, ensuring the construction is built as per design is really where we're at. And so we're working with HDR and our sub-consultants to really make sure that is delivered. And that's the key right now for us, is to make sure that we get the outcomes for it. We're projected to get about, the energy model shows about a 24 target for EUI on the facility.
That's great, and I know you've been talking to Em, and the commissioning thing is going to be a big deal.
It will be. We have a separate commissioning agent working with us in JLL, and so that they are part of that process for sure, and will be very important in ensuring we get the outcomes.
And the sustainability vision, it sounds like what you just. Like, I love that every one of these new hospitals, you think we just built a hospital. You know, they've all got a history, don't they? They've all got a story behind them. But the sustainability vision, who was leading that? Was it the board? Was it an individual on the board? Like, where did that come from?
Yeah, I would say it's the senior leadership team. It was working with them to kind of really bring it. And then they created a subcommittee of community partners, of foundation, of the mayor. You know, there was a real community portion of it it that really
Okay.
brought it together. But I think, you know, the organization as a whole, really, with the leadership, was the ones that really kind of spearheaded it. And then, you know, looking at all the opportunities with our sub-consultants on the technical side of it, right, really bringing that to something that's tangible.
Peter, similar question to the one to Mark from the other side, the consultant side that's trying to respond to this direction, this persistence, this stubbornness, may I say it, which is great. That's how you get there. As the consulting lead, how did you respond to that? What did that look like from your end?
Yeah, well, I think just picking up on James's point, you know, James's leadership was critical to this, but also the community. The community was very invested in this, and I think it's interesting for us because as consultants, we see all sorts of healthcare facilities like HDR designed Humber River. We're working on the Ottawa Hospital now, massive projects, and then being able to adjust to each community in each community. And we were talking earlier about speaking the right language to the right people. And that's what's really important. So with, you know, with the county, there was that real focus from the community on sustainability. And so that was a key piece of it. And I think I would say in success, from success and thinking about why that was potentially successful and why some of our projects, you know, Humber River would be another example. You know, we have a lot of these 3-word phrases coming out right now in Canada, and I'd say it's really clarity, consistency, and collaboration. So it's having that clear targets, clear vision that is written right into the RFP. It's having that consistency that you stick with those principles throughout the project. And there was some talk about, yeah, you're going to hit bumps in the road, but you need to stay consistent. And then finally, it's that collaboration between the design team and the client, with the community, with physicians. We've talked so much about this multidisciplinary as being important. And that again, was a great example in this case. And then finally, with the design partners as you go forward. I think for Penticton, for Prince Edward County, it was interesting because, yeah, it's the first mass timber. It's not just kind of aesthetic mass timber on the front entranceway. The entire building is structurally mass timber, and so it's the first whole mass timber building, hospital building in Ontario. In fact, we believe it could be North America. And linked with Ground Source was really putting proof to that promise that we gave to the community of showing what those results were. And it quickly came out, and we haven't talked a lot about this today, but it quickly came out when we started to run the numbers of the carbon impact of the building. So, you know, on one hand, we were looking at Ottawa Hospital. There, the embodied carbon is 30 times the individual every year's operational carbon. So that if you think about that, that's a 30-year payback. And that's carbon that we're spending right now, this year, when we're in crisis. So we really got to think about that upfront carbon. When we looked at Picton Hospital or Prince Edward County Memorial Hospital, we were seeing it was like 60 times. So that's really drove. We had to look at the embodied carbon because we were already doing all the right things on the operational carbon side. So really looking at what that impact was. And then finally is thinking about the overall emissions from hospitals. So we're starting to do a study now with Hamilton Health Sciences on their scope 3 carbon. So scope 1 is your carbon you're spending, you know, on your natural gas, you know, primarily it's the carbon you can control. Scope 2 is your electricity. And then scope 3 is all the other carbon. So we've seen from the NHS that about 80% of carbon is actually in that scope 3. It's carbon we're not even looking at now. Our initial studies with Hamilton Health Sciences, we're seeing that as about 75. So it's really starting to look at these other layers of carbon and really seeing where those synergies exist. And then finally, I'll just close on the whole piece with Prince Edward County was interesting with the ground source. So we did take the initial look at it, and I'll have to admit that there was a little bit of, you know, there's risk, severe risk aversion. So there was a little bit of, this is new, this is different, you know, maybe we don't really want to do this. So let's give it
worst case scenarios. So we look at all this new technology and we price it as a worst case case scenario, and we price the existing technology as a best case scenario. We're assuming all our boilers are going to be well maintained and last 30 years. Well, we know that that's not always true. Same thing with like chillers, etc. But then we look at something like the ground source field, which we know will last into the hundreds of years, but we only priced it to last 30 years because it's a standard mechanical system. Once we did that deep dive and we worked with our economist group internally, which was a great resource to have, and we put a net present value, not just looking at simple payback, suddenly it made huge amounts of sense to go forward with something like the geo exchange system. So a lot of it is getting out of that normal kind of process and breaking people out of the box to think about it in a little bit different way to make these systems more attractive.
Rudy, with you, I mostly want to get into all the other projects that happen every year and how they work, but you've got a tower of your own coming along. I wonder what thoughts you've heard so far from the panel around your new development that's resonating with you. Were there any aha moments there? I better make sure that works.
Yeah, I think the aha moment is the more I listen to my colleagues here, the more underperformer I think I am and we are. And I think, we're probably amongst the first hospitals to have sustainability on the strategic plan over 6 years ago.
Yes, you were.
In terms of having, reducing our carbon footprint. We have 2 towers, just under $3 billion over the coming years, plus a whole bunch of the other projects that are going on. And I think the difficulties that we're encountering, I want to say there are probably 3 things. The first is as we develop, or as our teams develop the business cases with the unprecedented cost escalation of construction, are making these business cases very unfavorable. So when I look at, what is it going to take to go lead gold, for example, and they tell me it's going to be 40, 50 years of payback, this is when it doesn't become financially incentivized to do this. Ties into the second piece, which is our funders. There are probably 2 sources of funding for this type of thing, government, HERF, and those types of things, and the internal capital funding. No donor is going to be interested in funding those types of things. And if our funding conditions are structured to do like for like, this is where the limitation is. So we are replacing boilers this year, and we may end up having to do a chiller like for like without having to go with the heat exchangers and that. So the reality of the funding formula is still behind, and I think the reason for that is because the building codes and the standards haven't caught up to make this building code required. Toronto was the most visionary, I would say, in terms of creating the Toronto Green Standard and in 2022, and that's forcing us to do things without having to debate it. If it's code, it's going to get done, and the funding envelope having to do that, because otherwise, that's what gets value engineered right off the bat to bring the cost back to where it needs to be. And then finally, the third and probably most important comment, and I do want to acknowledge our colleagues at Northwell Health and Island in terms of having dedicated resources that are doing this type of work and driving the advocacy for this type of work, and not having to do it on the side desks of facility operators and facility leadership. So having the right teams internally to drive this, and more importantly, or equally importantly, having the right partners and the consultants to also drive us. So we do quite a bit of work with Kurt at Smith & Anderson, and Kurt pushes the envelope with us and drives us to push the envelope, sometimes too much. But I think that's the idea, is we have to be driven to do this kind of thing because the funding formula doesn't allow it. Nobody's interested in funding it. So that's where the challenges are. We have to get it into the code and get it in terms, it's not an optional. We have to get the funding legislation to reflect this, and then we've got to have the right people to do it.
Yeah, it's an interesting site. So Mike at Northwell has 27 hospitals. So he has the substance to put a team in place. Pierre has multiple hospitals, multiple sites. So you're right, the way we're organized in Ontario doesn't lend to that, and it really does lead to the utilities kind of filling that. How do they marry that together again? How do you get the sharing and how do you get the resources across there? And that, I think, in terms of program design is very challenging. Gillian, any questions from the live feed? I thought there might be.
Actually, just briefly.
Yes, Peter.
Yeah, I was just gonna.
Sorry, a little come. Yeah.
So just on the funding, like for instance, when we were doing the Ottawa Hospital, one interesting thing was, and where you can sometimes find these win-wins, was on nitrous oxide. So talking, a conversation we normally wouldn't have, just happen to have with the anesthesiologists, and they're like, we don't really need centralized nitrous oxide. We were able to delete that. $5 million saved out of the project from not having all that piping and the big tank and everything else. So sometimes these conversations can be very profitable.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think one other thing that I wanted to mention is in Ontario, the forms of contracts are changing. And so the benefit of having DBFM and the inherent mutual interest in building it right for the future was there or is there. Whereas the new contract forms that we're looking at in Ontario now, whether it be progressive or IPD, et cetera, will be even more challenging to embed those types of improvements in it because nobody's the other party is not incentivized to do that.
Gillian, what are we hearing from the?
Actually, that was right exactly where this question's coming from. So it's like synergy. The question is, how do you hold Project Co, designer, constructor, accountable for achieving the energy target on a newly built DBF project?
So David, you want to pick that one up, and James will be listening really carefully.
Yeah, it's, I think we've got obviously a contract that, well, the setup of the project from the beginning with the M included, I think, is the original incentive. Yep. The governance moving forward helps as well, but I do really want to emphasize that it's not just a contract issue. The setup of the contract, what can be done under the contract, is just one part of it's there, it's available, but the gains, the success doesn't lie there. I think it's really in the working together, the collaboration, which has been said over and over here today. I think that what can be achieved through the right communication and working together and allowing all parties to operate at their best is far better than maybe a short-term battle to achieve something. The contract's there when needed, and it has to be, and from time to time it has to be flexed. But I really think that the overall longer-term success lies more in the working relationship.
Yeah, I always love the common themes that roll from year to year. I remember at this event last year, I came into that feeling new delivery models and new accountabilities, and if you don't get it right, you're going to pay a lot of money, and got talked out of that completely. The relationship is everything. I think somebody said, we'll be married for the next 30 years. You probably don't start that relationship with a gain share, pain share kind of agreement, and I don't want to go there. I'm no longer married, so it's
except that the new forms of contracts are not going to have that benefit, and so I think that's exactly when you look at the Ottawa Hospital. I mean, there are no PSOS to specify whatever target is going to be. The marriage party has to agree on that together, and that'll probably become even more challenging with limited dollars.
We learn. Any more questions from the floor? Kurt at the back, and then, yeah. It's late in the day, Kurt. We're looking for a zinger.
Oh, I will deliver. So I guess the challenge that we find going to existing healthcare and putting new construction aside, involved in that a lot. And, we somehow find the dollars in Ontario to build those new facilities, pay for FM through private financing, right? But it's existing healthcare facilities that struggle, and decarbonizing those and finding those dollars, as we find out. Rudy and I know firsthand with Alkit here, a recent experience. And I want to know from the leadership team, from the healthcare facilities on the panel, how open are you to energy as a service contracts? Because the history of them, in some cases, I've heard negative feedback. What's the appetite there? Because in some cases, that the money that was made available at the Canada Infrastructure Bank was not made available directly to healthcare facilities. So it all went to private entities who are now selling energy as a service. And that is where those carbon tax dollars are for healthcare facilities. And how complicated is that? And what's the appetite for using those dollars to decarbonize your existing facilities?
Rudy, can you pick that one up?
I was hoping some of my other colleagues maybe would do that, because I don't know the answer, actually. And if I knew, we would have gone ahead with that project, Kurt, that we didn't go with. So again, I'll defer to my colleagues.
So we're on the sustainability wise, we're kind of on the early journey, although the Picton Hospital is a huge success. We have 3 other sites which are much older, have the same struggles that people have spoken about here about replacement, and it's a matter of timing, and and like we're losing boilers and winter's coming, and so I need to replace it, right? And so you don't have a lot of time to think about it. You've just got to get it done. And then at the same time, HERF doesn't allow you to think outside of the replacement box, right? You've got, how do you think outside of that? So how do you build that in when it's 10 times the price to do what you really want to do and what you should do, but you're kind of stuck in that. So it's a bit of a juggling game, I think, within that. But I think for us right now, it's actually having the voice from our side directly to the ministry at the HERF level, at Capital Branch, having it at the senior leadership level, and having those same conversations so that we're in tune with that. And so you have it at all different levels and you're pushing that agenda. But to talk about the contracts, I think it's mixed results. Like I've seen ones that have run their cycle, and it's because they're so long, some of them, you don't, has someone kept track of it, especially if you if you change players, right? The people who set it up leave, and then somebody else comes new, and then it's kind of halfway through it. So I think it's, you have to kind of really be careful how you pick those. But I think there is opportunities there, and I think more and more are creating those opportunities. But you really have to kind of, I think, create that partnership. And I think it is important to kind of have those as opportunities. But you want to really be prescriptive on what you want the results to be, because you have to be clear about what you're trying to achieve and make sure that that makes sense from a business case, and then really get the buy-in from your leadership to do that, and then get on that journey, right? It's a journey.
I love the question. And Andrew, if I may put you on the spot, can we, yes, one more question here. Yes, please. Yes, sorry, Anita.
Thanks very much. I think this is for Rudy. So our hospital foundations, they raise a lot of money, and they often raise money for things that are very attractive to the public, such as getting a new robot, which really provides questionable and marginal patient quality gains. Is there a role to leverage the foundations for, say, when one of your boilers goes down? It may not be as attractive to the public, but is there a way of framing that? Because I don't know if it would cost more than some of these other pieces of equipment, like MRIs, whereas if we appropriately use this equipment, MRIs, maybe we don't need so many.
Is this session being recorded, by the way?
No.
So the reality is, yes, thank you. So the reality is, yes, the answer is yes. And where we see the most benefit of this is that, let's say the foundation agrees to fund a redevelopment of a pediatric inpatient unit, for example. This is when, in the pricing of those types of jobs, you have to be able to leverage upgrades to what's behind the walls and above the ceilings. If, will the foundation go and say, we need to raise money for a boiler, or for any of these wonderful initiatives? The answer is absolutely not. So but where the opportunity is to leverage foundation-funded type projects, to use those as opportunities to renew the base building systems. And because they're not government-funded, there's an opportunity to do what's right in terms of replacing them with the right technology, et cetera. But it's secondary, and it needs to be built within these types of budgets, but not as long as they're not the primary focus.
I agree.
Short and sweet. If I may, Andrew, if you're willing, I'd still, this whole area of managing HERF, managing funding sources, beyond the obvious, managing these relationships. Love to give you the last word on this if I could.
Oh, okay. Well, so just back to James's question. So I always push the envelope on HERF and always push the ministry, both HERF and PCOP. I'm that Matt that always asks them to look outside of their formulas and their manuals and come to the table and dialogue. So if you've got a project that you have to replace something and you think that there's some value in upgrades, just submit an ECP and have the dialogue. You're going to find 9 times out of 10 that after they dialogue and get their mind around what you want, it'll be added to Schedule A. And then you'll have a choice with what your money can be used for. Don't just think you've got to stay within that box, because most of the time, yes, they've prescribed what to do and what not to do. But if you give them a compelling reason to one-off your change, you'll see in a couple of years that your one-off becomes part of the standard. They'll iterate with you. They'll say, we got to think about it. You've got to come to the table. But if you create a compelling case as to why this is so much better than what they've thought about, you're the operators. We know our business better than the ministry sitting at a cubicle does. So challenge them before you just simply write it off as can't use my HERF funding.
Okay, the very, very last word to Rudy.
Thank you. And I think this is a great strategy, Andrew. The only challenge is this would work if you're willing to dedicate your HERF funding for the entire year for that particular project or for multi-year. The reality is the funding you get is limited, and by you dedicating it all to this improved, not like for like, means that 3 other things are not getting done that year or the year after. Yes, you may get some additional funding, but in the grand scheme of things, it's going to be at the expense of something else that's also likely at imminent breakdown.
100%. It's really about multi-year strategies and prioritization at that point. But if you can't put it there and you have no other funding source, then this at least gives you an opportunity, a way to sort out your problems.
Thank you, redevelopment panel. This is the second piece. Again, we got a lot of existing hospitals that need to be decarbonized. We need to get our capital projects right because it's our once in a generation opportunity before 2050 to put it in there. Love the perspective you've provided, and please join me in thanking this panel.